Okay, so we're here today in Reed's studio, Reed Hayes' studio, to talk about his amazing Buchla Modular Synthesizer, and which I know nothing of. I don't know, don't understand it at all. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about Don Buchla.
Well, Don Buchla, I only spoke to him a couple times on the telephone, and he was a man of very few words, but incredible ideas. And the main thing that he brought to synthesizer design was that he designed the panel first. As you know, the first thing he thought about is how is a human being going to interact with these knobs and make music on it, because he was a musician himself. And so when Morton Subotnick, the composer, had him build his first Buchla box for him in the 60s, Buchla went back and he showed up with this box with all these things that they don't have normal synthesizer names. Oscillator is about as close as you get, but there's a multiple arbitrary function generator. There's a source of uncertainty, and that's just how his brain works. And there's no black and white keyboard.
Right.
There are these plates. So this is getting louder and more expressive the more of my finger is on there.
So that's doing the pitch as well.
Yes.
As well as the sensitivity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And these little plates are setting different things into motion.
I'm used to modular synthesizers, Moog style or Roland style, whereby you've got like an oscillator, a VCO that goes to a VCF, that goes to a VCA, and then the VCA is modulated or triggered by an envelope.
Right.
But I understand that it doesn't work. There is no real filter.
His first instruments that he built had no filters. It just, you ran the oscillator. Well, no, it had filters. They were more like graphic equalizers.
Oh, I see.
And what you would do is take the output of each band of the equalizer and run it into its own amplifier.
Okay.
So if you wanted to make a sound that sounded like a low pass filter thing, you would set up as many envelope generators as you could. Make the high part decay first, and then the lower parts decay later, and all that sort of thing. But then when he built his next round of stuff in the 70s, he made this thing called a low pass gate, which is a cross between a filter and an amplifier. So, in its simplest form,
I see.
Just like a filter.
Yeah.
This is just like an amplifier.
Right.
And this is somewhere in between. So that as it gets quieter, it gets more filtered.
Okay.
Which is kind of how acoustic sounds work.
How a piano works.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the idea.
And why did he do it this way? I mean, was there no template before this? I mean, the way that Moog made his synthesizers, was that not a template?
Not really, because this was pretty much exactly at the same time that Bob Moog was coming up with his idea over on the East Coast.
Right.
Buchla was approaching it from a completely different thing. His model for inspiration was the analog computer, because before digital computers, that's funny. I had a friend from Huntsville come up here who worked on the space program, and the first time he saw my Buchla, he said, "This looks like what we used to guide missiles with." I'm like, wow, you're kidding. But so you would set up these basically math equations,
right,
using different amounts of voltages, adding them, multiplying them, and then your answer would be whatever the voltmeter said,
right,
at the end of the signal. But for a musical thing, it's a good template, because it's, you know, you start with something and then you get other things influencing it, and then you
and was, I mean, you said that Don worked for the space agency.
Mm-hmm.
So was he primarily a musician, or was that like a sideline for him? And then,
well, you know, he was a physicist.
Okay.
But then again, so was Tom Oberheim.
Mm.
But anyway, no, but he was always a musician also. He did his own compositions the way people did in the 60s, by cutting tape together.
Okay.
Which is one reason why he came up with the idea of having a sequencer.
Right.
To put those pitches together for you instead.
Your relationship with Buchla, with the actual synthesizer, because I know that you went to a particular college deliberately because they had a Buchla system.
Yeah.
So how did you know about the Buchla in the first place?
Well, in the very first place, I lived in Huntsville, Alabama, which was a little NASA town down south, and you know, but my father, who was a professor of psychology, his passion was every Sunday night he did a program on the radio about experimental music.
Okay.
So he would get all these LP records shipped to him from all these funny companies, and they were always lying around the house. And for some reason, when I was a kid, I always liked the electronic ones.
Right.
Morton Subotnick, or the stuff from Columbia, Princeton, or, you know, any of that kind of bleepy bloppy stuff. So, but the stuff that I liked the best was done on the Buchla. And then when it came time to, you know, figure out where to go to school, there was a picture of a Buchla in Oberlin's course catalog, Oberlin College, where I went. I played the cello, so I got in there as a cello player.
Okay.
And but I started taking electronic music classes, and the way I first accessed the Buchla was to hide out in the harp cases that they kept next to the electronic music studios in the basement until they closed the conservatory down, and then I'd get out of the harp case and sneak into the studio.
Oh, that old one, yeah.
Yeah. But, and then I just, you know, I fell in love, because it just, for some reason, it just made all the sense in the world to me.
It did, because I mean, as I said earlier, it makes no sense to me whatsoever. You know, so I'm kind of surprised. I mean, it must have been quite a battle in a way, you know, to get to grips with such a, you know, complex instrument.
Yeah, it kind of was, and it kind of wasn't. I don't know, just something about it. And it was a small system. It was about this big.
Right.
But you could do everything on it.
Right.
A 5-step sequencer. So
right. Very useful.
Yeah. But so you would find ways to. Well, actually, I had a friend with a Roland drum machine, and so when I could ever borrow that, I would use that and fire, you know, hi-hats and things into the Buchla, into the envelope follower to, you know, make rhythmic patterns and stuff that weren't just in 5. And
then you just carried on, because I mean, I know that, you know, you do the music that you do is TV work. A lot of the music you do is TV work.
Yeah.
And I imagine that, you know, a client might come to the studio and say, well, you know, I need a great brass sound or something, or string section to do this part of the TV,
right,
the visual.
Yeah.
But then this isn't, to me, this isn't the obvious synth to go to make string sounds, for instance. You know.
Right. Yeah. No, it's not an obvious string sound thing, but you know, you can whip up a rhythm loop on it pretty quickly.
Right.
And actually, a lot. This gets used in the mix a lot of the times too. We'll just run tracks that we've already recorded. Sometimes even string sounds. We'll record those through the filters, through the frequency shifter.
I see. So you use it as an external.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, is there? I mean, apart from the lack of a filter, right. I mean, are there things like noise generators and?
Well, yeah. The source of uncertainty is sort of one-stop shopping for everything random.
Okay.
So that includes noise, and it's got 3 different flavors. It's got, you know, high, middle, and low, and then it's got these glowing things that make a sort of random patterns that change at sort of regular times, but not really.
And you can't? Can you clock that?
And then it's got the part that you can clock. Okay. Then he built one later that was just crazy, where it's got all sorts of different types of random, where you could even just pare it down to 2 different voltage levels that sort of happen randomly, which is a nice little rhythmic trick too. So you can make it go but you never really know when each one's going to happen.
Right. But I guess that, like, I mean, if you're doing like work for TV, I mean, you're not so much looking for random.
Oh, sometimes we did a theme for one of those, one of the gazillions of TV judge shows that where the first thing you hear is the Buchla going coming out of this thing. So.
Right. And regarding the sequences, can you introduce spaces into? Is it just like a continual trigger, or is it like you put spaces into the 16 steps as well?
You can put spaces into it. You can do it in different ways. On this 16-step sequencer, every one of these holes is an output. If I could do a pulse pattern that's completely different than what's here, like if you hear that da-da-da,
yep.
I could just go and then plug it back in.
I see.
So that's sort of how you sequence your rhythms.
And what about this this beautiful
This is
cover of your new record?
Well, other than being a great little art machine, this is it might have been the last module that Don ever built before he died, and it was just released very recently. And what it's called is a polyphonic rhythm generator, and what you do is you program concentric circles of rhythmic patterns. So you can, and it's basically, however many little blips complete a circle. So you can have 16 against 12 against 7.
I see.
So, this little logo here would just be 3 half notes played on, different machines. But, and he was specifically trying to go for, I guess there's a East European folk music that does a lot of like contrasting polyrhythms.
I see.
So,
can you talk a little bit more about the keyboard? Because again, this is a mystery to me. Because to me, it looks a bit like a stylophone. And a very expensive and fancy one, but nevertheless, as you say, there are no black and white keys. So.
Right. Now this is playing a scale that I tuned into it. Now you can have each plate play different notes. Now this always conforms to a scale because I've got a special thing that's quantizing the notes, but and it's a great way to cheat because you can sound like you know what you're doing that way.
Right.
Yeah. But that paired with the ability to not only set something in motion, but to put more of your finger on it after the fact, as aftertouch, basically.
Oh, I see.
It lets you do a lot of stuff without even needing to use an envelope generator.
Right. And the other thing that, because you did a talk last Sunday, and about the tuning problems with the Buchla.
Right.
And I know that with early Moog systems, they also he also had the same problems, because the components just weren't designed, and they were unreliable, and you could never get the frigging thing tuned.
Right.
But what I don't understand about the Buchla is, okay, in the early days, sure, the components weren't available, and it was very unreliable.
Right.
But towards the end of the production line, so to speak, why weren't they then made to be reliable?
Well, they actually were at the very end of the run. First the famous story is that Don Buchla called Morton Subotnick and he said, "Hey, how often does a violin player retune?" And he said, "I don't know, about every 15, 20 minutes. So Buchla made the oscillator so that he had to retune it every 15 or 20 minutes. But by the time he started working with computers in the 70s, he made this oscillator that had sort of a primitive version of what the Prophet 5 auto tune, where it would check the cycles and stuff. But you had to use a computer that looked like it was on the cover of Computer World and, type code into it to do it. So I have no idea how that works. I think he wanted very much to he was very against black and white keyboards. I think he wanted to put people in a position of having to come up with their own scales, with their own rows of notes.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just him being, I'm not doing that because everybody else is doing it.
Right. Yeah. And I think it was to really, get people in the headspace of saying, well, this is an instrument that has never existed before. I'm going to make music that's never existed before. Right.
And I guess also that falls in line with his whole thing about it being an instrument that you play as opposed to you use.
Right.
But then you do use it.
Right.
Right. So you can play, but what I'm saying is you do use it with your work.
Right.
So when you do a C, it has to be a C,
yes.
so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Fortunately, it's like any old synthesizer where if you leave it on long enough, it kind of stays
roughly in tune.
Yeah, exactly. And
the envelope generators.
Yes.
So are they regular like ADSR?
No. The very first ones he made in the 60s were called attack generators.
Okay.
Which is deceiving because you can make them go meow. But I guess he thought that would be a slow attack. And what he ultimately wound up with was this thing called the quad function generator,
right?
Which gang two of these things up internally to make it so that one does attack and decay, and one will do a delay before the note, and one will do a fixed duration.
So you can chain them.
Yeah,
I see.
And you can also this little red hole here fires off a pulse at the very end of the envelope, so you can actually have it play a whole musical sentence by daisy chaining a bunch of envelopes together. So it could go bam, beep, that kind of thing. Or the way I do it a lot is I'll have one envelope being a very sharp attack and then another one being a very long attack, which is good for acoustic type sounds.
And did Buchla design also effect modules?
Yes, yeah. Well, all his very first instruments and his later instruments all had spring reverbs, which sound great. This one has two Hammond reverb tanks mounted in it. And then you could get to the reverb in different ways. You could make it so that it, goes from bone dry to all the way wet and sweep that with a voltage or a sequencer or whatever you want to do. And then, according to my friend Mark Verbos, Buchla actually invented the digital delay / harmonizer without really realizing it on a module that he built in the 70s. I don't have one, and it's very noisy.
Right.
But so yeah, he was even doing stuff like that. But he always made a provision for you to go to, if it's not a built-in reverb tank, you could, easily interface with a plate reverb or a tape delay or whatever.
Right.
Buchla made the 200 series to run at plus 4 dBu, which is what the standard recording studio level is.
Okay.
So his idea was you wouldn't even need a mixing desk.
Right.
You just plug this directly into a tape player, plug it directly into a reverb tank or whatever you need.
Are any of his own performances recorded?
He did a couple records. I have some LPs of some sort of systematic kind of processy minimalist stuff, which is tonal, which is kind of funny. But I did see him perform a couple times, and he was very much from that 1960s West Coast Fluxus thing of where he did one piece where he had people wear glasses with 5 notes of a music staff on it, and then he'd set up a popcorn machine and then ask the performers to, see wherever the popcorn crossed the musical staff on their glasses to play that note. So it was very... it was just as much about the concept as about the actual music.
Right.
And I think he wanted to put on a good show.
So your system itself, I mean, I'm assuming you didn't come out of college and just buy this.
No. I came out of college and I worked like crazy making commercial music and television music and all sorts of things. And as soon as I had enough money, I started buying little Buchla systems, because just around that time, all the universities were getting rid of them.
Oh, is that right?
Because they thought computers could do everything.
Right.
So they didn't need this anymore.
Right.
So, but that's what I did. And so I had all these kind of random, weird little Buchla systems. And finally, my business partner and I built this giant wooden cabinet to put all the greatest hits of everything in there.
Right.
Because as you know, if you're going to use every module that's staring in your face.
Yeah, it's about accessibility.
Yes.
If something's plugged in, then you're going to use it, and
Exactly.
if it's down in your basement, then it's probably not going to be used.
Right. Or there's a modular synthesizer on the other side of the room, but I'm not going to run really long cables across the room every day. It's one-stop shopping is always better.
And so, have you found? I mean, in the years that you've been doing the music, that you think, oh, you know what, this is kind of interesting and it's cool and it's difficult and no one else understands it, but I'm going to just use a Pro One for this particular set. You know what I mean? It's going to save me like buckets of time. And
well, you know what the weird thing is? I can actually make a lot of sounds way faster on the Buchla than I can on anything else.
Really,
I used to have a CS80.
yeah,
big Yamaha keyboard. Because I like that kind of wiggly kind of sound, of what. But I had to tune that thing like crazy. I didn't screw in the top. And I kept the little tweaker next to it, and a blanket, and I had to take off my watch, open up the thing, and tune 16 oscillators every time I wanted to use it. So. It was way easier to just throw in a couple cables and make something that goes
right
on this thing.
And something like this, I mean, some of these modules are really old, right? Can you maintain it, or?
I can do a little, but I don't want to do too much because I don't want to leave a soldering iron on a 40-year-old printed circuit board too long and blow it that way.
Right.
My friend Mark Verbos is a genius at fixing Buchla stuff, and the synthesizers that he builds now are based very heavily on the on that aesthetic and approach. And I don't know what I'm going to do when he moves to Berlin next year.
You're going to move with him?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, move to Germany.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
But yes, there's always that element of fear because this thing, this MARF, multiple arbitrary function generator, it's got 200 CMOS chips in it.
Wow. Just
waiting to fry.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because on Sunday, I thought the funniest thing about Sunday, your talk on Sunday, was when Mark's talking about this amazing machine, and yourself also,
right.
And then he said to the audience, if anybody's never used one of these or would like to try it or look at it, after our little talk or Q&A, then come and have a go. And then the moment the talk ended, the power went out.
It just shut down.
It just shut down.
Yeah. Made a very festive thud, and that was it. Oh, yeah. And and Don Buchla stopped building the multiple arbitrary function generator when he himself was performing.
Oh.
With an audience of 300 people. And the thing just died, at beat one. Mark was fixing mine up. He was calling Don Buchla, and Buchla was like, I don't want to talk about that thing. So.
That's very cool.
Yeah. How was that?
Hey.
Did that work? Okay. Cool.
Amazing.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So you can have fun that way.
That's so awesome.
Oh.